This is Gemara Baba Metziah Daf Lamid Vav. We're holding on the last line of Lamid Hayamid base that we're about to dive into some dinim of karbanis. But in order to get there, let's quickly review what happened in the Mishnah. We had a very unique case in the Mishnah. Someone rented a cow and lent it to someone else. What we have to remind ourselves is the halacha is a renter is pater from einsim. And therefore, if the renter swears that the animal died, he gets off scot-free. A borrower is chayiv, is obligated for einsim. So the borrower would have to pay back the renter. So now, with that, we really dive into this final line of Lamed Hamid base, which is the din of Rav Yirmiyah, which Rav Yirmiyah is going to discuss. There are times that both the renter, the borrower, are obligated a chatas if there is a shvuas sheker. So let's look at the last Rashi on the page over here to introduce this sugya. Says Rashi, Amas Nisan Kai, says going on our Mishnah, the last line of Rashi Lamed Hamibis. Hasaycher v'ashayel nishba'u l'sheker v'lahi kafru mammon. They swore falsely and they didn't deny money. Harehein b'shvuas bitoy v'karban shaloi chatos. And they have to bring a chatos, as the pasuk of Yikra says, oy nefesh ki sikari. So what happens over here is there's two types of shvuos. If someone's making a shvuah for in order not to pay, then he has to bring an asham when he later admits that he swore falsely. Whereas if someone is making a shvuah not to deny monetary liability, but for some other reason, like in our case, then there is the chatas. So says Rav Yirmiyah, pa'amim sheshneim chatas. And we turn over to Lamed Vav Amid Aleph, upa'amim sheshneim ba'amim ba'asham, upa'amim she'aseicha b'chatas v'ashayel ba'asham, upa'amim she'aseicha ba'asham v'ashayel b'chatas. Says the Gemara, ha ketzad. Let's understand all these cases. So again, if one swears to deny monetary issues and later admits, that's where the asham comes in. If one swears to deny not monetary, but rather some other form of payment, then that's where the chatas comes in. So said Rav Yirmiyah, there are times that they're both chatas, they're both asham, some chatas, some asham. Ha ketzad. Let's understand what's going on over here. Says the Gemara, and first on Lamed Vav Amid Aleph, 3 lines down, the rule that we just said. Kfiras mamain is an asham. Bite sifasayim is a chatas. That is the klal. The klal is that when you're denying money and you subsequently admit it, then you bring a karban asham. If it's a bite sifasayim, if you're denying some other form of payment, then the halacha is it's a chatas. So now says the Gemara, there are times that they're both going to be a chatas. What's the case? They're both going to be a chatas 5 lines down. Kigain, the animal died regularly. Va'amra, va'amru. And they, the seicher, the shayel, they both said nensa. They both said that it was an oines. It didn't actually die. Robbers came and took such an item. Soicher, when it comes to the renter, the benkach ubenkach miftar, potter. When it comes to the renter, either way he's potter. As we learned to the Mishnah, all forms of einsim, the soicher is potter. So bechatos. So what is his shvuah? His shvuah has nothing to do with money, because whether it was actually Mesa Kedarka, whether it was listim, whether it was robbers, in any scenario, the seicher is going to be potter either way, and therefore he has to bring a chatas. The shayel, that what benkach ubenkach chayuv mechayev. Either way you look at it, the shayel is chayev. And then for such a false shvuah, he brings a chatos. Case A. Kikain, for example, she'negneva was stolen. V'amru, mesa machmas malacha. The Tarvayu Kafrim and Moina, they're both denying Mammon. Why? Daha Mechayvi, because if it was Mesa Machs Malach, they both would have been Mechayiv. Vikapatri and Avshayu, and they're patring themselves by saying the opposite, excuse me, because they're Chayiv for Nignava, but they're patring themselves by saying Mesa Machs Malacha. And they're patring themselves by saying Mesa Machs Malacha. Therefore, the shvuas that they made are denying monetary payments. That's the reason why they both have an asham. Seicha bechatas v'shayel ba'asham ki going. Shemesa kedarka v'amru mesa machmas malach. So seicha the being make a miftar potter whether it died whether mesa machmas malach. So chayev bechatas. So the seicha is false. Shvuah has nothing to do with money, and therefore he would have to bring a chatas. Shoyel the mechayev b'meisa kedarka. Shoyel's a chayev b'meisa kedarka. Kapater navshev b'meisa machas malacha, and he's trying to pater himself from payment with meisa machas malacha. Therefore, you have to bring an asham. Soicher ba'asham v'shoyel b'chatos. What's that case? About 15 lines down, the first one line is Soicher. Kegain shenignava was stolen. Va'amru meisa kedarka. Soicher the mechayev v'gneva v'aveda. And the Seicher is trying to pat himself by saying it died. Therefore, so after we go through all four cases and we explain each permutation of Rav Yirmiyah, says the Gemara, Micah Mashlan, what is the Chiddush of Rav Yirmiyah? Explains the Gemara, Lafuke mid Rav Ami. He's coming to exclude from Rav Ami. Damer. Kol Shvuah Shadayanim Ashbiyan Isa, says Rav Ami, any shvuah that Bezdin makes one swear, Ein Chayvin Allah, Misham Shvuas Bitui. You'll never be Chayv Achatas for swearing falsely. Shenemar, says the Pasik, Oy Nefesh Kisi Shava Levati Sifasayim, Kisi Shava Me'atzma. So Kamash Vulan Rav Yirmiyah, like Rav Ami, that he holds that there is a chatas, it is called a shvuas bitoy in all of these cases, even though these were Bezdin imposed shvuas. So part A of today's share is figuring out all different permutations when there's an asham for denying and swearing against monetary liability, when there's a chatas for just swearing, not for monetary liabilities, but rather a regular shvuas bitoy. Itmar, says the Gemara, we're smack in middle of Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. The first one line is Itmar. Shomer shemosar l'shomer. What is the story? We have a machlekes. Rav Amar Potter, Rav Yechlan Amar Chayiv. Rav says you're Potter when one shomer gives it to the next, and Rav Yechlan says you're Chayiv. Omar Rabbi, l'tayim de Rav lo'mi bayi. According to Rav, it's pashit. Shem yechinim shemasal shem yisachar dayul el shemir asai. That you're making it better. It's pashit that you're potter. Ela afilu Rav's chiddush is afilu shemer sachar shemasal shemer chinam digrue gora l'shmir asai. You're lowering the level. You're a hired paid watchman, and you give it to your friend to watch, and you don't pay him. Still, Rav says potter. Why? My taima da masre lebentas. Because Lamaisa, says Abaye, you gave it over to a person with das. Well, the Tameid Rav Yechlan, on the flip side, the Chiddush of Rav Yechlan is Laimi by Yisham Rizach Shemas Shem Echinam Digrui Gara Lishmira. Say that Rav Yechlan Oder Chayiv. Ela Afilu Shem Echinam Shemas Shem Tzachar. Ta'yule Alui Lishmira. So you're upgrading the Shmira. Still, you're going to be Chayiv. The Amar Lei. Why? Because the Bailim could say Ein Ritzaini Shebiktaini Biaracher. I do not want my animal in anyone else's possession, and therefore, even though you gave it away to someone else and you paid him, you're still chayiv. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Chisda Had Rav Lav Beferish Itmar Elo Mechlala. The din of Rav that one shemer giving over to the next is Potter. Says Rav Chisda, Rav never learned this explicitly, but rather we were able to learn from and deduce it from an implied ruling of Rav. Tahanu ginoi. There were these gardeners. There were gardeners that every day would deposit their shovels by certainly elderly women. One day, 10 lines on the white lines. Instead of being deposited by that elderly woman, they deposited by one of the people of the group. Shama kala be'ilula. And the one who was watching all the shovels heard the sound of a chasana, and he wanted to go to the chasana. Nothing, he went out. He wanted to go to the chasana, but he knew he had all the shovels to watch. So he said, I have a great idea. Let me give it to the old lady that we used to always give it to. He went to the chasana. By the time he came back, Ignaiv, Lamaisa, Marayu, the shovels were stolen. So Asla Kamei de Rav, Upatri. Rav said, you're Potter. Says the Gemara, Man de Chaza, the one who saw this story, Savar, Mishem Shemer is Potter. They thought the reason why you're Potter is because you gave it to another Shemer, so you're Potter. But says the Gemara, it's not accurate. V'loihi, shiny asa, 2 lines on the white lines, it's different. They would always give it to that lady, so you don't have a raya. To a regular case of Shem Shabbos L'Shem, or maybe only in this case does Rav hold that there is a pitur. Yosef Ravami v'kamer l'lah shemaitza. Ravami was sitting and saying over this din, and Eisvei Rav Abba Bar Mamula Ravami. Rav Abba Bar Mamula asked Ravami the following shayla, which is going to be a kasha on Rav Yochanan that says Shem Shabbos L'Shem is chayiv as following. Ha'seicher bara mechaveiroi. Someone who borrows a cow, rents, and he lends it to someone else. Says the Braisa, this is our Mishnah. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, that whole Shomer Shabbos L'Shomer is chayiv. So in this case, where he gave it to a shoyel, why can't the owner say, I don't want my item in the hands of someone else? Amar lei, so responds Rav Ami, he allowed him to lend it out. If that is the case, then the borrower, the shayl, should pay to the owner and not to the renter. Why? Because, and this, if he had permission, that means it's kilu coming straight from the bailim. The case is where the owner told the renter, do what you want as your discretion, but it's not a kasha on Rav Yochanan. Masiv Rami Bar Chama, 4 lines from the bottom, another kasha on Rav Yochanan. Hamavgin moist. Someone deposits money, sorry, running ties it up, running puts it over his back. Muslim and gives it over to his kids. Or he puts it and he does not lock it up properly. Chayif. Why is he chayif? Because he don't watch it properly. Says the Gemara, what's the obvious implication of this? It sounds like the reason why he's obligated because he gave it over to his binai. Who be toyakitanim? Hagitalim. What would that halacha be? Sounds like the halacha would be Potter. I asked the Gemara. Why doesn't he say, I don't want my item in the hands of someone else? Like Kashan Rav Yochanan. Rav Yochanan held Shem Shabbos L'Shemer chayiv. My Rava says, Rava no kasha. Kol hamavkid, anyone who gives an item to someone else, as we turn over to Lamed Vava Mebeis, anyone who gives an item to someone else does it. Al das ishta yubanav umafkid. Does it with the mindset of his wife and kids, and that's the reason why he was potter in this case. Amri Nehardai, I'll prove what we just said. Dekinami Araya, Dektani Shabas Labanabi Dai Kitanim Chayiv. Hello, Da'ilim is water. But it's only Benayu Bitai. So Chalda Chayrim, like Da'ilim, like Kitanim Chayiv. Mamish, like Rabbi Yochanan said, Dimkei, less like Kitanim Stama. Why did it say Benayu Bitai Kitanim? Just say Kitanim, Shema Mina. Therefore, instead of having a Kashan of Rabbi Yochanan, the tables turn. The Gemara says, really from here, we have a beautiful raya to the Shita of Rav Yochanan. Says the Gemara, Amarava, wrapping up this sugya of giving the items to someone else to watch. Hilchasa, Shaimer, Shemasa, L'Shaimer, Chayiv. Laimi by Shemer Sach Shemasa Shemer Chinam, the Guru Grum Shirasai, Alavin Shemer Chinam Shirasai Shemer Sacher, Chayiv, my time, and Amalei Behemet to Li B'Shvuah, Heich, Loi, Mehemet Li B'Shvuah. So Paskins, the Gemara, like Rav Yochanan, Shaimer, Shemasa, L'Shaimer is indeed Chayiv. And we continue 12 lines down at the tomb, that's Itmar. Says the Gemara, Pasha Ba. What's the story if the Shemer was Paisheya V'yatzal Agam, and the animal went out to the marsh, Umeisa Kedarka, and it died regularly. So it starts off with a Pshia, and then the animal dies regularly. So we all can already start conjuring up this sugya that's about to happen. Abaya Mishmei de Rabba Amar Chayev, Rabba Mishmei de Rabba Amar Potter. So we have machlokes Abaya and Rava as to that which Rabba said, whether in this case you're Chayev or Potter. Explains the Gemara. By Mishmei de Rabba Amar Chayev, why? Kol deyanu dol dayin ki aidino lav deyanu. Says Abaya, whoever doesn't down like this is not a dahayon. If you hold that something that starts off as negligence and ends off as a mishap is chayiv, then it's pashit chayiv. Elafilu says Abayu, limad omar potter. Says potter still hacha chayiv. Why? My time adamina and havla dagma katla, because you brought it to an agam. And then maybe the Mesa Kedarka was really not Kedarka. Maybe the Mesa Kedarka was fueled by the Agam that you brought it into. Says Abaye conclusively, the Rabbah holds your chayiv. Rava Mishay the Rabbah ver Potter, and says Rava Kodem Lodin Ki Aidina Lav Deyanu. Loi Bibai says Rava Lamanda Amar. Tchaz Mishay Zaben is Potter, it's Pasha the Potter. Ela Afilu Lamanda Amar. Says Rava, even according to the opinion, says chayiv still Hacha Potter. My time, Tamrina and Malacha Maves, Mali Hacha, Mali Hasam. Why does the Malacha Maves care where the animal is? Very good, he brought it to the Agam. However, Lamaisa, who's Mesa Kedarka, therefore says Rava, everyone should agree, in this case, you should be Potter. Says the Gemara, Maidi Abaya, and Abaya admits in the following case, we're smack in the middle of the Amid, the first word of the line is Hacha. Says the Gemara, Maidi Abaya, Abaya admits, the Hajjal Abay Maro Mesa, Potter. That if the animal you brought to the Agam, then you took it out and you brought it back to the owner, and then the animal dies, in that case, Abaya agrees that you are Potter like Rava. My time of the Hajjula, because you returned it. You can't say anymore that it was the Hevel, the airspace of the Agam, that killed it, because the Maisa returned it to the owner. And on the flip side, Umaydi Rava, and Rava admits, Kol Eicha de Ignav, and wherever it's stolen, Ganav Ba'agam Umeisa Gedarka, Beganav de Chayiv. And Rava admits that if a Ganav steals the animal from the Agam, and then it dies in the Ganav's possession, says Rava, then he agrees that the Shomer is Chayiv. Why? Because his negligence caused this animal to be stolen. My timer, Tishavkas Malchamav Zebese the Ganva have Kaim. Because even if the Malchamavis didn't get involved, where would the animal be? Would be in the possession of the Ganav. So in this case, Rava agrees that you are Chayiv. So Machlokes Mikotzel, Kotz, as they say, from one end to the next. Rava saying Potter, Abaye saying Chayiv, and two cases in the middle, which they both agree. Amar le Abaye le Rava. So we begin the conversation. Abaye says to Rava, who holds your Potter, Ledidach, according to you, Rav, Tamre Malach Hamavis Aliyachim Aliyasim. Malach Hamavis doesn't take sides. He doesn't care where it is. And in fact, you brought to the Agam is inconsequential. Therefore, Rav holds your potter. Asks Abaya, Hi Doisi Rav Ravami, that which Rav Ramal asked to Ravami. Vishani Lena by Ravami responded, Le Bishanasnoi. Loi Bailam Rishos, we saw at the bottom of Alf that the Bailam gave him Rishos to Lahashal blended out. But according to you, Rava, who cares that the Bailam gave him Rishos? But why don't we just say the simple Sfarim Malchamavis doesn't care? So Amar Le, Rava responds, according to you, you're chayav always because you don't want the picard to be in the house in the possession of someone else. You could ask on Rav Yechon Lididi. Then you could ask on Rav Yechonon, and everything makes sense. Lididi, the amina that I hold, ant mehem li b'shvua v'hayech loy mehem li b'shvua lekal oisvei klal. There's no kasha at all. So both Rava and Abaya each have reasons for themselves connected to the previous sugya, how there is no kasha on the other. To say a little bit better, what Rava's responding is, Abaya had a kasha. And Abaya said, according to you, why don't we say, Malach Hamavis, Mali Acha, Mali Yasim, the previous sugya, because Rami explained that the Mishnah is talking about the Bailam Gim Rishos Lahashel. Rava responds, according to you, then, according to you, Abaye, who says that Rav Yechon holds that you're chayiv. Why? Because you could say in then the whole story starts. But says, and that's why we have to respond as he did. But says Rava, according to me, the whole kasha never began. Because I hold so we conclude with one last kasha on Abaye. Masiv Rami Bar Chama asks Rami Bar Chama 10 lines on the wide lines. Hela l'roshe tzukin. If a shepherd takes an animal up to the top of the narrow, steep mountains, v'nafla, and it falls, ein ze oinis, it's not an oinis v'chayiv. Ha meisa kedarka, ha reisa oinis upater. Says Maravamai, le male avir dehar katla. According to Abaye, why don't we say that the air of the mountain killed him? Who cared that it was meisa kedarka? But you brought him up to the mountain. Inami, ofsana dehar katla. Or maybe it was the exhaustion that you caused the animal to walk up such a steep hill that caused it to die. Kashan Abaye answers the Gemara. The shepherd took the animal up to good pasture up there. Says that true, Nafla, Nami. Even if it fell, he should be potter. Because he brought it up to a good place. Says Gemara, no, Shaylo the tagfa v'loy tagfa. The reason why he's chayiv is because he should have held it firmly, he should have held it tightly, and he didn't. Yachim Reisha. The Reisha said also the Rosh Tzukin v'navla hareza oinis ibayle lemitkufa. Why is it an oinis? You should have grabbed hold of the animal better. Says the Gemara, Lo Yitzricha, what's going on over here? The case must be Lo Yitzricha shetakfa v'alsa takfa v'yaradsa. Takfa, v'yarda. Says the Gemara, the Mishnah had to say this case, shetakfa grabbed it on the way up and grabbed it on the way down. But there is no kasha in Abaya, and we'll pick it up from Rav Yossi the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.